Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for 16th of September comes to you from London. And we start by looking at the dollar, but I should mention that crude oil prices have jumped about 10%, almost as much as 20% at the open on the attack in Saudi. And that's having a little bit, we'll look at Brent crude in a minute, but that is having a little bit of an effect on currencies. So we're seeing the dollar index actually bearish below the cloud on the short-term chart. So bearish for the dollar index. The euro is sitting at that 110 level, so that's back into short-term bullish territory against the dollar. The yen, which is normally the safe haven when in times of distress, we're seeing here the yen actually holding on to its bullish trend against the dollar, and sterling actually also holding a more bullish position at 124.60 now. So we're seeing sterling making highs that we haven't seen since July, so 2-month highs there. Looking at against the euro, sterling also climbing higher, holding on to its bullish short-term position, and against the Swiss franc sitting at 123.24, so some respite there as well. Taking a look at Bitcoin, we're still holding on to the $10,000 level, but we are in the doldrums around this 10,200 mark, and pretty hard to see it breaking out at the moment. It just is in this flat position now for several weeks, so that's quite key as well. The US stock market is sitting at down slightly on Friday, but it's holding on to a bullish week. So we are still seeing stocks looking pretty strong there, and NatGas also looking stronger as well. And the Dow was up slightly on Friday as well, and so we're just seeing this continuing nudging higher, getting nearer and nearer a new all-time high. The Russell 2000 index also looking stronger there. The futures this morning, the S&P futures down about 1/3%, and the Nasdaq E-mini is down just over 0.5%. So it does suggest the US market is likely to open a little bit lower. This Saudi attack having a bit of a knock-on effect on a number of other markets. We see the FTSE 100 down 0.2% this morning, and Midcaps down slightly, but still holding that very clear bullish trend over the short term there. Looking at the DAX, was down actually 2/3%, but actually holding on to short-term bullish as well. And the CAC Current down about 0.5%, but holding its trend and still looking at this multi-year high. Taking a look at Japanese market, it was up nearly 1%, the weaker yen helping there. The Hang Seng down a further 1%, protests in Hong Kong still weighing a little bit on the market there. And looking at the Chinese market, fairly flat this morning. The Sensex was down, India down 2/3%, a large oil importer, so the oil price might be having an effect there as well. The Aussie market up slightly. Taking a look at the oil charts that we talked about, we see this jump in Brent crude prices this morning. You can see here this massive daily candle. We were up as high as $72 at one point this morning. We're now back at 65. So a lot of volatility in the oil price this morning. And interestingly, we have got this downside target. We've got an upside target off this thrust and a downside target. It does look like if we can hold these gains that we might well start to make a transition to bullish, but we've got work to do and watch where this lagging line closes on the chart today. Looking at WTI, much the same picture, of course. Jumping higher and nudging that new medium-term bullish zone. US NatGas sitting at $2.65, so it's pushing higher. Now clearly medium-term bearish, so it is making that transition as well. Gold sitting at 1504, just holding onto this $1,500 mark for a while. Still just bullish on the short-term chart, and silver much the same picture there. We're seeing probably not quite as bullish as gold with the lagging line just dipping below the cloud here, so is quite key there as well. US 10-year yields sitting at 1.47%, so sorry, 1.86%. We've seen here we come right the way back there on the 10-year yield, so that's quite key too. And the Bund future. So you saw a sell-off in German bond prices last week, and that continues. So we see the bond, remembering that the yield is inverted. So bond yields increasing, bond prices declining, and so we've seen quite a big sell-off in the bond market last week. Taking a quick look at the stocks now. This data all coming from Thomson Reuters. So the data here on this screen coming from Thomson Reuters Icon, or if you're using Metastock, the same thing running from Metastock. Here we see running off the Dow. So we start by looking at the Dow Jones Index on Friday. The best performer was Dow Inc. They were up 2.6%. United Health Group were up 2%. The chart just holding on to its bullish trend. Apple were actually down nearly 2%. So they'd had quite a good week, but we saw the sell-off on Friday, but still looking pretty good on the chart, looking almost set to make new all-time highs, outperforming the Dow by 20% this year and good upside targets. So nothing to worry about there. It's quite key. Taking a look at some of the NASDAQ stocks here, the best performer on Friday, Trip Corp, Monster Beverage also, they were up 2.45%. Charts looking pretty volatile though. On the downside, we have quite a few stocks here. Apple weren't far off that laggard board, down nearly 2%. Starbucks were down as well. Haven't looked at that chart for a while. It was down 1.7%. The trend in Starbucks actually almost doubling over the last 12 months. So it's not surprising that we see Starbucks giving up some ground. Taking a look at the Aussie market now, the best performer, Bellamy's Australia, they're up a massive 54%. They jumped massively on overnight. And on the downside, we had Sims Metal Management, they were down 13%, and that chart actually looking pretty weak, underperforming the Dow by 10% this year. Taking a look at India now, we saw that India fell quite heavily, so not many stocks up. GAIL India, they were up 2%. Not enough to change the picture here. The chart looking pretty bearish. In fact, a lot of Indian stocks actually looking quite bearish. And Hindustan Petroleum down a massive 7%. So the Saudi news having an impact there. Taking a look at Europe now, looking into the FTSE 100, we see here the live updates coming in from Yahoo Finance. Only a handful of stocks up. Inevitably, we're seeing quite big rises in BP, Royal Dutch Shell. Those rises in the oil price having an impact for BP and Shell. Centrica, we're seeing also up 1.7%, but not enough to really change the picture on the chart. On the downside, the worst performer at the moment is EasyJet, down 3.5%. IAG also down by a similar amount. Carnival also in travel business also lower. So we are just seeing a lot of these stocks struggling. IAG actually down nearly 40% versus the Dow this year in performance terms, so quite a big move there on the relative. The FTSE 250, Premier Oil, Tullow Oil, no big surprises. Cairn Energy, a lot of the oil majors, oil companies up this morning. Not enough to change the chart in this instance. And if we look at the best performer, the worst performer, we see Wizz Air Holdings, they're down 4.5%. Saga down 4.4%. So that chart also continuing to look worrying, and CYBG also lower as well. In Europe now, if we look to the Euro Stocks 50, only 4 stocks up. No surprises for guessing what stocks they are. Total in France up a further 2.9%. Still a fairly bearish looking chart. The relative quite bearish. Eni in Italy, they're up 2.8%. So their chart also looking still quite bearish. We've got BASF and the chemicals industry and Engie as well. On the upside, on the downside now, if we look at there, we've got Airbus down 3.1%, LVMH, SAP, Adidas. Actually, quite a lot of selling there going on across the board. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.